mellow, I'm so high, I'm so dry. I'm just sailing through the sky. And I got my weed down, I can't come round. And Jack, I'm mellow. I'm gonna put my nickel in the juke machine and play my solid vendor. Gonna jump, stump, Susie Q. To the moon get splendor. I'm so high, I'm so dry. I'm just sailing through the sky. And I got my roach down, I can't come round.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Michelle McEwen, Emerging Professional Chair, U.S. Green Building Council.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this early Friday morning. My name is Michelle McEwen. I'm the Director of Marketing Communications for the USGBC North Texas chapter, as well as the Emerging Professionals National Committee Chair. And I'm pleased to welcome you to this Greenbuild Master Speakers session. As an emerging professional, the global impact of green building is incredibly important to me and my generational friends and colleagues because we want to see this movement be truly global and happen at a worldwide scale. We want to see markets work, new technologies get adopted, uptake for green building, growth, and innovation. And one place where this is truly happening is in India. Each year, USGBC invites inspiring leaders from our industry to serve as master speakers at Greenbuild, and our next speaker touches all of these areas. Through efforts of organizations like Frontier Markets, Microfinance Solutions, Good Marketing, Sales and Service Distribution, solar technology is happening all across that great nation and benefiting low-income households. Our speaker this morning is the founder and CEO of Frontier Markets and the president of Frontier Innovations Foundation. She's also an emerging professional who is a global leader and a visionary, and we know that Frontier Innovations is just the beginning of the amazing career and work and impact of Ajaita Shah. So please help me in welcoming her to the stage.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for waking up bright and early to hear me speak. Thank you, Michelle, for a great introduction, as well as USGBC to give me the opportunity to meet with you and speak to you a little bit about the work that I've been doing in India. Before I tell you about Frontier Markets, I thought I'd stop for a second and give you an idea of what was my thought process behind thinking about why solar technology would be such an important solution in India and other developing countries, but also why is it that it hasn't worked yet? So let's stop for a second and think about who we are as customers. When we are here and we're thinking about buying a new technology or a new innovation, we always like to think ourselves as people that have all of the information available to make a sound decision. We would like to have choices and options. We'd like to do price comparisons. And we want to make sure that whatever we're investing money in is valuable and useful. And lastly, we want to make sure that the investment of the product that we're purchasing has longevity, or it can last for a very long time. Now, if we think about that and we think about ourselves as that as a customer, why is it that we don't view the vulnerable or rural households the same way? At the end of the day, they too are thinking about investing in a new technology. They too are making very difficult choices to change their cultural behavior. So if we take the opportunity to understand them as a customer, perhaps we can look at why solar technology could be an interesting solution. So when I started Frontier Markets, I spent 5 years before this working in microfinance in rural villages and realized that the #1 challenge that they face is actually electricity inequity. We have almost 750 million households living in rural India. And what we realize is that they not only don't have access to electricity in general, but it's also not reliable. So to address this issue, we decided that we would look at a model that allows us to increase access of solar solutions for every rural household with a focus on after-sales service. Frontier Markets wants to play a role specifically looking at the distribution side. So I wanted to just quickly show you what that means. Today you have a new alternative fuel source. That could be biogas, it could be hydro, it could be wind, it could be solar. You have an organization looking at R&D and design, and I'm sure many of you here are in that field itself. There's manufacturers. You have manufacturing in America, in India, in China, and other countries. The challenge that we're facing is actually in getting that message out, being able to provide the last mile access for sales, and understanding that there really is a challenge on affordability, and then of course focusing on the after-sales service. So that's really where Frontier Markets plays its role. What we've done is we've set up our presence in India in various different states. In district offices, we've set up service centers. And so I'd like to, have you think about this as a Sears meets solar, where we're looking at focusing on after-sales service, providing multiple different product solutions, and making sure we can reach that last mile. The twist in our model is that what we wanted to do was localize this as much as possible. So when you have existing retail points in rural villages who are farmers, they're dairy, they're agri-seed distributors, we wanted to see them as a customer, but then also look at them as an entrepreneur. And what we decided to do was we said, let's integrate you into the model and convert you into a solar retail point. What that did was it significantly increased access and localization of solar solutions, which is where the rural customer comes in. Suddenly, the rural household can go a kilometer away and buy a solar solution because it's locally available. The other part that we looked at was looking at innovation in mobile technology. Today, the most incredible thing that's happening in our space is that mobile phones are available everywhere. You have Wi-Fi services available almost everywhere. You have telecom operating towers available almost everywhere. It's starting to bridge the divide between rural and urban in a very significant way. So our mobile technology solutions allows us to scale and standardize a lot of our efforts and work. What we're able to do is collect better data, reach out to the end customer faster, and we started doing a customer service call center that allows us to follow up with the end customer or that rural household in a more effective way. That's led us to a very interesting situation where now we're not bringing in products just based on our assumptions. We're bringing in products and solutions based on the demand that's coming from the rural household. When a rural household understands the concept of a solar lantern, suddenly they start understanding the concept of solar. And what happens is they start thinking outside the box themselves, and they start coming to you with better solutions. So one quick story is there is a dairy farmer who bought a solar lantern for his house, for his children to be able to read at night because they don't have access to electricity. And the only time they have available to study is actually in the evenings. And so when he bought that solar lantern, within 3 months, he came back to me and literally took his dairy milk measuring machine and dropped it in front of my office and said, make this solar. Do your thing, make this solar. And I looked at him, I said, what does that even mean? And he said, add a solar plate and make this solar. And it was a really interesting moment because we realized that once they understand the concept, we were looking at the power needs that were required as well. And suddenly what that did was it allowed us to bring our engineers, our electricians together and start thinking about power pack solutions for things like dairy milk machines, solar pumps, agri-tools, small shopkeepers, local homes. And suddenly the innovation grew and allowed us to open beyond the solar lantern, looking at power pack solutions, looking at street lights, and really starting to understand that when the concept sells, the demand increases and the innovation begins. So far, we've built 4 service centers. We've sold about 50,000 solar solutions, ranging from lanterns to large systems. We've created 250 retail points, and we're working with 5 different energy companies, but 25 different products. We're hoping by 2018 to have 500 service centers, 10,000 retail points, and working with at least 25 plus different types of energy companies. So I wanted to take this time to actually think a little bit more about this as an opportunity, some of the lessons that I've learned while working in this space, and the challenges or opportunities that I think are going to be coming into our sector in a very interesting way when we look at not just India, but the developing markets and looking at where energy access has a very significant role to play. So one of the challenges that we face is energy finance. The end customer doesn't have a lot of money. The entrepreneur doesn't have a lot of money. And unfortunately, even the innovative companies that are coming up with product solutions also don't have economies of scale to be able to afford their ability to get the price to drop more significantly to make things affordable. So now we have an opportunity for government, for agencies, for asset finance companies to come in and start thinking through how do we deal with this affordability issue, the supply chain issue, and how do we think about finance becoming an interesting opportunity in the space of the energy sector. Product innovation. There's not enough innovation yet. We've definitely crossed very interesting points. I think that there's very, very interesting designs that are coming out of institutions, universities. However, the challenge that I see is that there's a silo. When I'm sitting at MIT and I decided to create a lantern, but I actually have never been to India, there's a big disconnect. When we're thinking about creating larger solutions, but we're actually not having a conversation with the rural household themselves to understand what their needs actually are, and are they relevant, there's a problem. So this is a chance for us to think through more innovative product solutions, but also start thinking about bridging that divide and integrating that dialogue in a very different way. Technology integration and big data. This is a very interesting space. We're starting to understand that with the mobile solution platform, we'll actually be able to also start understanding that rural household, understanding emerging markets better, but also start being able to adapt to trends and analysis of whether this is working or not. This is a very interesting opportunity for mobile companies, big data companies, app companies, and also looking at, again, agencies and philanthropy to come in to start testing things out. Now, the challenge that I see in this space is that I don't know enough about technology. I don't know enough about big data, and I definitely don't know enough about mobile apps. I'm still learning about new applications every single day. Now, what would be interesting would be to have someone who's in this space come and have a conversation with me and understand the context of my needs for the work that I do and find an interesting way to collaborate. Could we create a very interesting social media platform for big energy, for clean energy? Can we actually integrate mobile applications and tools to make the last mile simpler, more effective? And I think this is a very interesting opportunity. Moving markets. Throughout this week, having very interesting conversations with folks at USGBC, I realized that there's so much innovation, manufacturing, architects, design, and engineering happening in the US. And it's such an interesting opportunity to say, well, can we bring that innovation into India? Can Indian innovation come to America? And can we figure out a way to kind of do cross-collaboration and cultural discussions that allows us to understand where we fit? So I thought about New Orleans, I thought about vulnerable cities, I thought about disaster relief, and I thought about why a lot of my experiences in India actually start applying to the work that we're doing in the US. And now it's really about thinking about how, again, government agencies, private sector, US philanthropy, and organizations like TERI, the Energy Research Institute, can come together and start thinking things through. The challenge, understanding that cultural divide. The challenge is opening up more dialogue to understand, hey, if I'm an architect in America and I've been designing lead clean energy infrastructure and buildings, what is it that I can do to help in the Indian development sector? How do I understand where my role is? And I think that that conversation needs to start happening more significantly. And finally, I'd like to take a chance to even think through some of the opportunities that I see with organizations like TERI. When we talk about scale and replication, we're also having to understand policies, standardization of certification, and I think that there is still a massive divide there. We have a lot of different movements and periods of time where we have government getting involved in solar. India has been looking at solar for 25 plus years. So their understanding of standardization and certification is significantly different than the US. But having dialogues through the USGBC and folks like TERI, we're fighting to start seeing an integration to bridge that divide. And so I'd like to definitely, hear from you guys more significantly to understand how have you been thinking about this? What is it that you would like to understand more about what's happening in the emerging markets? Where do you think that we can bridge some of these divides? And how do we take these challenges and turn them into much larger opportunities? And of course, I'd be very interested in wanting to be able to help bridge the divide from the work that I do so we can have an interesting dialogue. So I actually purposely kept my presentation short because I really wanted to engage the audience further and get more feedback from you in terms of how you've been thinking about this and what is it that I can help integrate more in terms of an effective way to collaborate unique opportunities that are happening in America and being able to bridge that for the emerging markets in countries like India. Thank you. Do we have mics to be able to hand out to people so that we can start a dialogue? So why don't I start? How many people in the room are architects? How many people in the room have been working on developing some LEED-defined building or infrastructure or thinking through sustainability in the US? Okay. How many people have thought about their skill sets and applying it to emerging markets? How many people have figured it out? Wow, you figured it out. Can you please come down and share with us what you do so we understand how you figured this out?
Good morning to you all. I'm Vatsal Bhatt, just starting my work with USGBC to work on cities at USGBC. But I've been still working with Brookhaven National Lab. That is one of the US Department of Energy's national labs. And trying to work on behalf of US Department of Energy and US Department of State with cities in India and China. And what we try to do is try to work with them to design their sustainable energy plans for cities, work with them to how to implement and all, and also work with a lot of US companies to see how we deploy projects, and then monitor the progress and feed it back into the planning process. So this is how we have been working for the last almost 8 years in India and China.
That's great. It's an interesting point that you're bringing up. So I do work in Rajasthan. And in Rajasthan, the goal of Rajasthan is to be a future solar state. And the cities in Rajasthan are tier 2, tier 3 cities, which means they're not as large as Delhi or Mumbai, but they're emerging. There's a lot of development happening right now as we speak. And so there's a hope to create resilient cities, solar cities. Now, the challenge, and while you're doing fantastic work, I think that there's still a massive, massive divide in terms of opportunity. It's taking too long. And I'm going to throw this out there saying that when we think about the dialogue that's happening right now in the energy access space, especially for developing countries, we're realizing that we really only have about 5 years left to prove that there's a market opportunity here. And so the way to make this happen faster and scaling it is that we need to collaborate further. So the folks that raised their hand that said they were thinking about emerging markets, they were thinking about sustainability, and they were thinking about their role as architects, I'd really ask you to invite you to give us a little bit more about what you've been thinking about and why do you find it challenging. So how can we only have one person in the room that's figured it out? Where's everyone else right now in terms of what they're thinking through as they're thinking about their skill sets and applying that to emerging markets? So can I please invite some of those people, and I'm looking right at you, who raised their hands and said they're thinking about this, but haven't actually figured it out yet, and what that thought process is. We have a shy audience. Okay. I will start pointing people out. Oh, great.
Okay, I don't have an answer to that question, but I am curious to know more about these solar solutions and what they are. You know, one thing I've heard about is an organization that goes into, I think it's rural India, and sets up like pop-up factories where the villagers come together and they build solar ovens and very simple, solar solutions, and they're looking for ways to scale that. Now, is that similar to what you're doing?
Sure.
I'd love to just know more about the products themselves.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So there are companies that are starting to look at creating manufacturing through the women themselves and creating a movement through that. I personally find that very challenging because, again, I opened my presentation talking about the customer's perspective of quality, of after-sales service, and of wanting to make sure the product that they're investing in lasts for a while because there is an affordability issue. Now, when we start looking at manufacturing within India and working with women and training them, the products aren't of the highest quality. And they're not products that can last for the longest period of time. It's a great idea, theoretically, and you are generating income, but is that something that I think is scalable? Honestly, no, I don't. I think that we have this, unfortunately, there's this perspective that every time you want to create a self-help group or a setup of women to come together, they should be making something. They should make something and then they should sell it. I'm not sure why that's the case. And I've seen this in the crafts sector, I've seen this in livelihoods, and I've seen this even through microfinance. The assumption is that if you want them to be productive, they should make something and then they should sell it. What we do is we actually work with existing manufacturers based out of India, China, even some in the US, that are creating product solutions that are ranging everything from a lantern to looking at high beam Foxlight torches. There's Pico home lighting systems, which are 10-watt plates with a battery with 3 LED lights and a mobile charger because a cell phone is very important to this community, and they finally have one. And then also ranging into solar inverters. So when we said solar inverters, as I mentioned earlier, there's a range of power needs that are very specific to these rural households, and we've been trying to customize it based on that. So we work with our manufacturers to actually assemble some of these solutions. Where we have women involved, where we have rural households involved, is in, so the rural retailers themselves, these are fixed shops. They were selling electronics before this. They were selling mobile phones before this. They were selling agri-seeds before this. So they've been in this rural village for a long period of time. And what they're actually now doing, and they're known into that village. They know everyone there. Everyone trusts this person. They're now saying that I want to adapt to solar as well. So now when you say, Badri Prasad in Shahpura is your new solar sayogi or solar partner, everyone knows that he's the guy to go to for solar. His wife is someone who doesn't really move a lot in Rajasthan because it's a very conservative state, but she does hang out at home and invites all of her friends for tea. And when she's home, she's also then talking about solar. And she starts showing the lanterns to her friends. And she suddenly becomes what we call a solar saheli or a solar friend. And kind of like the Tupperware meets lights model, so Tupper Light, she starts talking about solar lanterns, starts exchanging information, placing orders. Suddenly, this is a family business. Suddenly, she has a role with her husband. And we're seeing that be a lot more effective. The third way that we're starting to look at income generation for rural households is also on after-sales service. The skill sets to replace a product, change a battery, take a wire out, it's not an intense skill set. It's a very trainable skill set. And so what we do is we train the local masonries, women, to start looking at the replacement. Because at the end of the day, if your product breaks down for whatever reason, but you cannot service it fast enough, you've lost your customer. So how do you localize this as fast as possible? You try to make sure that there are people there on the ground itself. And a quick note on that, and this is again where I think technology is so interesting. On our streetlights, so solar streetlights has been something that everyone has been trying to figure out for the last 10 years in India. And the reason why you need solar streetlights is because there's literally no outdoor lighting. And it's a massive challenge in villages. So you had the Indian government want to put in solar streetlights because when you had municipality look at streetlights with wiring, they felt the challenge that they were facing was people would take that wire, cut it, and connect it to their house. So they'd steal the electricity. And they were the criminals. And the challenge with that was they said, okay, great, we'll do off-grid lighting. We won't have any wires. But then they had these large batteries. And so again, the challenge that they faced was people would come, no one knew the streetlight was even there and what its purpose was, but they'd see a big battery and they'd again look at that as a power solution, so they'd steal the battery. And so when you started looking at these disconnects, we started asking ourselves questions like, why is this happening? Why are people not appreciating that solar streetlight? And they said, because that streetlight stops working within 5 months. We don't even know about that streetlight. I don't know what that battery's purpose is. And when you start thinking about the disconnect between the rural households and the initiatives, you start wanting to A, address that. But then B, we said, okay, well, what if we didn't have any batteries that they can steal? What if we had a lithium ion battery in our solar streetlight, making the battery invisible? And what if we actually used cell phone technology to put a sensor into that streetlight that allows me to have immediate notification if the lumens have been dropping? So what happens now is on my cell phone or on my laptop, I get notified if there's any streetlight whose lumens are shaking or it's not working, and I can immediately inform my local solar Sayogi or Saheli to go check on that light. So for the first time in a long time, you actually have the people that sold the product getting in touch with you for service versus the other way around, which has been pretty powerful.
Hello, Santiago Rodriguez from Mexico. I would like to comment this social aspect about the implementation of renewable energy in rural areas. I heard a story when I was doing my master about this village. I don't remember, I think it was in Africa. And some Germany NGO went and implemented a solar pumping system for their well to collect water. But the problem is that they didn't made a research of what was happening before in the social aspects. The well, they use it to socialize. No? The people went there, and then that's how they met all the village. And then with this new solar pumping system, the people didn't need to go to the well to collect water, and then a lot of, people didn't meet, and there was no place to meet. So I think that's really important, and I would like to know your opinion about it.
Sure. I really appreciate that example. In fact, I think I shared that exact example 2 weeks ago. There's an unintended consequence when we aren't engaging the community in an anthropologic or social perspective. And I think we're seeing that very significantly. To just expand on that example, so I'll give everyone context, it was in Africa. These were women that actually had to travel about 2 hours to collect water because they didn't have access to a well. And there were these students and an NGO that came in and said, we're gonna solve this immediately. What we'll do is we'll create a well right next to their village. And that'll give them easier access to water because that's obviously their problem, obviously. Now, the challenge was that these women only gathered and socialized when they were walking those 2 hours to that well. And during those 2 hours, they would talk about their problems, they would talk about their needs, they would talk about the politics in their village, and because they were able to help each other and collaborate, it was a very strong matriarchal village. As soon as that well came, they stopped meeting. They stopped going on this 2-hour walk. They stopped having conversation. And suddenly you had isolation, you had silence, you had violence, and actually the matriarchal system fell apart. And it was a very powerful consequence in that village. And we said, and so what we all asked ourselves this fundamental question: how are we engaging the rural communities into this dialogue? How are we making sure that our solutions, our perspective on our solutions are actually the right ones or the wrong ones? And I think that's something that we're starting to think through a lot. In a previous session of mine, I talked a lot about why we have to start integrating other fields more closely into clean energy access. And we talked about looking at anthropology, sociology, finance, policymakers, engineers, technology folks, entrepreneurs, marketing people, salespeople. I mean, there's so many layers when you're thinking about energy access. And so that dialogue right now isn't happening as effectively, and you're having people think through the same challenge in isolation. And if we looked at that collaboration, it's a very different feeling. I also honestly have a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. So I've been working in this space for about 10 years. I've been living in these villages, and I spent a lot of time asking myself tougher questions and engaging in dialogue. And so when I have an opinion about how things work in rural India, it's a very strong one. I meet so many students, NGOs, and leaders that do field visits for a day, a week, and they think they know India. And the answer is you don't. And that's why we have to start really asking ourselves some tougher questions. And there are programs like the Institute for Village Studies, which addresses this, which says, if you really want to understand a village, you really want to understand a community, you really want to get involved in emerging markets, live there for 6 months, not a week. And I think that's really powerful as we start thinking about tougher questions as we're engaging this community. Another point to this also, though, is that there's a lot of connections between energy access and a lot of other initiatives that are happening. So I don't know how many of you were present in the breakfast of Women in Green, the Power Breakfast, which, by the way, I loved. But a lot of our discussions was talking about, when we think about scale, when we think about opportunities, how do we fit into our own passions and understand what women's needs are? And healthcare is something that we're thinking about a lot every day. We're also thinking about education a lot every day. Now, how many times have you had a discussion where you said, yes, and there's a role for energy access there as well? And the thing is, that dialogue is only starting now. And that's where I've started playing a much stronger role, because I'm saying that, look, when you talk about healthcare, when you talk about education, the reason why energy access is there, because without power, you can't deliver a baby with a machine. Without power, without lighting, you can't really be functional and feel safe. Without biomass cook stoves, you're going to constantly deal with indoor air pollution as being one of the biggest killers of women. So when we're starting to think about where energy access plays a role in a lot of these different verticals, we need to start collaborating a lot more with the sector and be on a common ground for that dialogue. On the education piece, one of my favorite stories, and I think an initiative that I'm hoping will start soon, is how many of you have heard of the girl effect? Anyone? So the girl effect was something that was started by the Nike Foundation, which was about bringing more adolescent girls into dialogue and starting to think through innovative ways of giving them a message in a more trendy fashion. So the never again, I don't want to be like my mother, I want to move forward, I want to change. That concept was coming in, and the movement was in healthcare. And this is where the Nike Foundation was actually very successful in Africa. And when I met them, I said, well, this is great. Can we use this platform for energy? And they looked at me and they said, but no, we do healthcare. And I said, but we are still talking about healthcare. We're talking about cook stoves. We're talking about lighting and empowerment. And so it was amazing for me to see the disconnect between that dialogue. And this was 2 years ago. But now it's suddenly coming onto that platform. So now when Nike Foundation does distribute their cell phones and has that message, you're seeing collaboration of content coming from women empowerment, education and training, healthcare, and finally, energy access. And so this is something that we think is an interesting way to start collaborating in a different level. And I'd love to also, anyone interested in that, I'd be happy to expand on that a lot more in terms of where's energy access playing a role in other different areas as well.
Hi, I'm Helen Kessler from Chicago, green building consultant. But actually, that's not what I want to talk about. So I've actually had the honor of going to Africa, to Ghana, with an organization called the Hunger Project. And they're doing work in India as well. Very different in India and from Africa. But in any case, in Africa, they're looking at communities and how to bring rural communities together. And really changing the social structure in a way that creates equality between men and women. And so that it's really exciting. And when I was there, I could see that this kind of idea was a possibility, but they just weren't ready for what you're talking about.
Right.
So they were beginning to get ready. They were beginning to, getting wells. They still, in most of the villages, don't have electricity. They're getting lanterns, though. And so that was really, so you could see the evolution.
Right.
And it was all about what they want. And they were creating their own visions for what they needed. And what was exciting about it also was that where they started was they thought there was no possibility.
Right.
And then through the work of creating a vision and creating commitment and looking at what they could do to make this happen, they started creating microfinance projects and so forth.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it, because I think it brings out another important point. So this is a collaboration, and when we're thinking about collaboration, we're also thinking about what information do we need to be sharing to even start that dialogue, to start creating visions. So, the major challenge also is that there's zero exposure for these rural households, whether it's Africa, whether it's India, whether it's China, whether it's anywhere else. They're not getting to be here. They don't see what else is out there. And so it's a lot of it is balancing between what we know, what we can share, and also understanding what they need and what they want. And as you rightfully said, it's a slow process. When I started working with my field staff, and we're a sales company. At the end of the day, we're a sales company. The more lanterns and solar systems we sell, the larger chances we have to grow. But we're doing this with a heart, and we're doing this with an understanding that the communities that we're working with are very vulnerable. And so we have a lot more accountability there. However, when I was training our local field staff who don't have an experience of being in a social business, they kept trying to sell the solar lantern. They just wanted to push the product down so that the rural household would buy it. And I had to help them take a step back, and I said, look, you cannot push a product into the life of a household that's never seen this before, never understood this before, has never thought this through before, hasn't had that vision yet. They understand the problem, but they don't understand your intention. And so we did a lot of training on concept selling. You have to first help them understand what solar is. Why does it exist? Why is it relevant to you? Do we understand your problems or not? And is there a way for us to integrate this together? And so I thought 2 case studies that I had shared with them was on Colgate's dental hygiene program. So when Colgate first decided to want to sell toothpaste and toothbrushes in rural India, no one thought it would work because a rural household has always been using, neem sticks, and they have their own local remedies. And so when you had someone say, stop using that, buy this product, they looked at you like you were crazy. They said, are you kidding? Why would I change what I'm doing? Who cares if it's a red brush? Who cares if there's interesting flavors? I don't want to spend the money. This is not helpful for me. So Colgate said, actually, there's a dental hygiene issue here with you continuing your practice. You're losing your teeth a lot faster. You're dealing with gum disease. And so their campaign was actually about why, if you don't change your practice or your behavior, you're going to lose your teeth. You're going to have gum disease. You're not going to be able to eat all the lovely foods that you want to eat. And so the campaign became all about being smart and taking care of your child. And what's amazing is that today, if you ask any rural household, why do they brush their teeth? And who does it? And how do they know how to do it? They said, we've always been brushing our teeth. What are you talking about? It's become a generational movement, which is amazing. And another example was Lifebuoy's soap. Wash your hands. So they wanted to sell a soap. A soap is a soap is a soap. But that concept, again, didn't exist in rural India or Africa or anywhere. And they had to say that in order for them to strategically bring soap into this market, they needed to first understand the challenges and the problems that come with when you don't wash your hands. And so that movement is actually what made this become so effective. So I think that, that dialogue is really important. How do you help people think about what their vision can be, what the possibilities are out there? People used to look at me when I was I have so many stories when I was in microfinance, and I remember the first time I was in a rural village and we were sitting in darkness and I was getting frustrated because I couldn't see anyone's face unless they smiled. And I was like, I can't really have a good conversation with you. Can we at least light a kerosene lantern? And they said, no way. And I didn't understand. And 2 minutes later, I heard massive yelling and shrieking. And we all jumped up and we said, what is going on? And I started running. And I remember because I couldn't see anything, I fell. So I had a cut on my face, but then we quickly got up and we had seen a woman holding her burnt child crying because she left him for 5 seconds to go to the neighbor to get some water for him. And the kerosene lantern was there and he was playing with it and he got burned. She lost her house, she lost her child in 5 seconds. 5 seconds. And then I looked at I looked at the people with me and I said, does this happen all the time? And they said, now do you understand why we don't want to light a kerosene lantern? Stay quiet and sit in this darkness. And that's what actually changed my life. That was where I said, this is ridiculous. This is an injustice. And how are people sitting here saying that this is just the way it is? This is our life. And so I think that it's about creating hopes and dreams, showing other possibilities, but then of course engaging them in that dialogue to make sure that you're doing it right and more effectively.
So I have a question. I will say I'm guilty in that I'm one of those people who's traveling to a village for a week coming up. In my day job, I work for a real estate developer that is based on community and creating community. But the nonprofit that I'm actually traveling with is more around education. And so going into, it's actually in Africa and working on educating and getting getting their students actually the education they need. But the interesting part and the question I have for you is the other half of that organization is based here in the United States on working with our elementary school kids on actually exposing them to social change and making that connection with the belief that that's when true empathy is really possible. And I've seen now that I'm a mother that really is kind of where my focus is kind of working on our next generation and getting them brought up in the right way. I was just wondering your thoughts on how we start to focus on our youth around these kinds of things.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for sharing that, because I think that it's a very important topic. So the reference by the way, it's great that you volunteer for a week and you do the work that you do, because I think that's a great way to start thinking about applying your skill sets and being able to give that time. You're working with a nonprofit that's been present there for a while, so at least you have that cultural context because they can bridge that divide. So you can spend a week there, it's okay, because they've been there for a while. But to answer your question, youth need to get involved. We need to figure out a way to create exposure. When I first started working in India, I was, I think, 19 years old. And the reason why it happened was because my professor said there was an opportunity to look at microfinance because of one of our donors. And they said, do you want to go to India and check this out for a week? And I said, of course I do. So I decided to use my spring break to go to India to just see what's out there, understand what microfinance is about. And I think that's what inspired me. I looked at what was happening in a way that I didn't understand completely, but I got excited about it. And as I started getting excited about it, I spent the next couple of years thinking it through before I was ready to start serving myself. The youth, the most incredible part of bringing youth involved is that there's passion, there's energy, there's humility. We're aware that we don't know everything, so when we're coming in, we're more willing to see what is out there, absorb and learn. And I think that there's fire. And that fire is actually what activates things in a very different way. So we've been talking to USGBC about this a lot. There's 115 chapters in America that focus on lead and energy access. So how do we engage them in this dialogue? How do we give them opportunities to at least get inspired? And so we are definitely working on this a lot more. And I think that, so I've been looking at this for college, grad school, college, and high school. I haven't gotten to elementary yet, because there's also a sensitivity issue of having people that are too young get exposed too early, liabilities of going to another country, and the responsibilities that you would be putting on the organization to make that happen. So, but I do believe that the dialogue can happen sooner. The way to scale that message, maybe not through a visit yet, but through videos and through online platforms that allow you to get those stories out there. So we've been working a lot with folks that create documentaries, journalists, and really starting to understand how do we scale our storytelling ability so that we can create better exposure for the youth.
I just wanted to ask, in my own nonprofit work, it's like everybody in here has a day job and then they also do other work, but we have a really hard time selling the business side of this. So we're a nonprofit, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're not a business, we're a nonprofit business. But so I was wondering if you could explain how you bridge from charity to your model.
Sure, and thank you for that. Do you mind telling me what your nonprofit does?
We focus on potable water in South America.
Great, thank you. So I've been having this conversation for the last week in Ixtapa, Mexico, on a forum called Opportunity Collaboration, where there's a bridge between donors, investors, nonprofits, and social businesses. And we're talking about why we need to demystify this assumption that a nonprofit doesn't have a business model. Because a nonprofit does have a business model. What makes you have a business model? You have a strategy, you have a vision, you have clear-cut operations and systems, you're looking at money and you're trying to regurgitate that money so you're not always looking at donor capital, you're lean, you're effective, you're trying to scale. That's exactly what a business is, and that's exactly what nonprofits should be. So I think, how do you bridge that message? So I have been looking at the social business side from day one. And I'll tell you, I've been guilty of looking at nonprofits as not being a business model when I first set up, when I first started working in microfinance myself, and I think that there's a shift that's happening. So when when we look at charity, we've been starting to talk to donors about effective venture philanthropy, saying that when you're doing a charitable cause, there's certain things where you just can't get your money back. So advocacy, for example, has no business model around it. It's a message, right? But if you're selling a solution, there's a way for you to earn some income because you're selling that solution. You might subsidize the price of that product through using grant money. So what we tell our philanthropists is we say, look, you might not get 100% back, but we'll give you something back because we're trying to rotate this and make this more effective. There's a lot of great books called the Lean Impact Model, which talks about how do you meet donors and charities and make them understand that this is actually an effective, scalable model. So I use terms, and regardless of whether I'm a nonprofit or a for-profit, because I also do run a foundation on the US side, I always use rhetoric as, this is our effective model, this is how we want to replicate, this is where we are trying to be efficient, this is what the model looks like on a rotation, this is what you're going to be getting with your money. Either you'll be getting a social impact story, You'll be getting a lesson learned, you'll potentially be getting some money back, or you'll be seeing the impact hands-on yourself. And I think that that's really the way we start bridging this. In my side, it's been a little challenging because we are a for-profit business. We do work with investors that are expecting a return. They do want to see a scale model, and we have a social mission. And so I think that what we've been really doing is trying to balance that story more effectively by saying that we're responsible or accountable for a vulnerable community. And so they're going to be products that don't work in this market. They're going to be solutions that are too costly. And we're going to have to be working with other partners to make it more effective. And we tell our investors, look, you're not getting a 30% IRR. It's not going to happen in 3 years. This is a social business. It'll take 8 to 10 years, and you'll probably get a 12% IRR. But you need to really care about the social impact on this, and that's where, the data, working with other nonprofit partners on the ground, and thinking through advocacy plays a large role in the work that we do.
As someone who runs one of those chapters for USGBC, how do you specifically see us working together effectively?
Sure. So, university chapter?
No.
Do you mind
Professional
elaborating?
chapter.
Professional chapter. Great. So a lot of the dialogue I was having in the last couple of days with folks is, I don't know what's out there. I don't know what's happening in emerging markets. I don't know where I fit. I don't know if I can fit. I don't know if I have the time. And what do you think, Ajaita? And I started thinking through what are the professionals' roles. You all come with a lot of experience in your work. And so there's space for mentorship as one of them for social entrepreneurs that are thinking this through. There's more volunteering. So can we actually work with you on saying that, look, these are certain projects that we've been thinking through. Do you have folks on your end that would be interested in coming, and potentially we create some sort of funding mechanism to make it happen? I've been working with groups on things called brain trusts, which is essentially I'd be the subject. You as professionals would be my advisors, and I'd sit with you for 2 hours going through a problem that I have. And given your experiences, so you being a chapter head, you can think through who you think should be sitting on that table based on your network. And we actually set up a call, or we set up a visit, or we do this in person. But it's an effective engagement where you're taking your experience and you're helping me think through my challenges, and you see some sort of results. My responsibility is to make sure I follow up. And I make sure that I bring you a part of that dialogue or that solution. So I've been starting to think this through in more tangible, effective ways so that we're not just having a conversation. We even talked about looking at creating an online platform. Should there be an energy map that allows you to see what's out there and you can actually figure out a way to connect directly? Or do we work with chapter heads and have you be that bridge between the professionals and the social entrepreneurs that are working in the field? I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions.
Ajaita, great discussion. I think when you're doing solar, do you also have interest in other technologies? Because earlier you asked a question, what kind of technologies can be customized there in, say, India, rural India? So we have worked quite a lot in India before I came here, after the earthquakes in Gujarat in 2001 and all. And what we saw is, human waste, kitchen waste, animal waste becomes, and the farm waste becomes a great resource for them to produce bio-based fuels and other energy and so on and so forth. And that can be used into their tractors, that can be used in small other things and all.
Yeah.
So have you been thinking about it? If you're thinking about it, then in US, many universities and research organizations are working on different catalysts and other aspects in which they can convert methane into different forms of energy. And probably when you are talking about holistic solutions for rural areas, like connecting with health and microfinance and education and all, this can become another great resource because it's local and only we need to bring a different technology that can work in their areas to really see. And these catalysts and ore are, in a way, black box. People really don't need to worry much about it. So that can be another way US entrepreneurs, US researchers, US academicians can help your activities as well.
So absolutely, and thank you for that comment. I'll give context to this in terms of what is happening right now in this space. There's companies like Husk Power and other biomass-related initiatives where people are looking at human waste, animal waste, agri-waste, and converting that into sources of power. I've been working with a specific company called KMRI Infrastructure, who's actually a part of the Sun Edison Group in the US. And what they've been doing is they've been looking at biomass as the power source to power telecom operating towers. And so what we've been starting to understand is how do you do that and then do power distribution more effectively? So the challenge with a lot of the biomass-related initiatives to create larger amounts of power and then create that as a utility for the rural household is that the investment is very high. We haven't seen a break even yet. And when you are thinking about where you're supposed to recover your money from, at least right now, is the rural household who will never be willing to pay that amount for the power utility that we're providing. So one of the things that we looked at is an ABC model, which is where you're producing that power, but you have 3 customers. So one customer is your primary source, which is like the telecom operating tower, but then you're creating additional power where your second source is actually a private company, like a dairy milk corpus that needs power for heating. And then your tertiary customer is the end customer who's working in that, who's in that rural village, and you're subsidizing the utility cost for them. So you're breaking even faster because you have 2 primary customers, but then you're also being able to do power distribution through alternative fuels. To your point on US collaboration, absolutely. I think that we've barely cracked biomass, and I think we've barely cracked biogas. And I think that there's a lot more interesting discussions here in the US side, where if we did cross-collaboration with the folks that are doing this in India, it could be very, very interesting, and we can see more scale.
I agree with you on the larger scale point of view, but I think what I was pointing out was a smaller scale. And even almost 30, 35 years ago, I used to go into villages, and they still used to have 4 or 5 cattle, and out of which they would produce a small amount of methane, biogas, and out of which they would at least run few lights in their homes. So I think what I'm trying to think about is smaller solutions and very small applications in which 1 household, 2 households, 5 households can get together and
let me just answer this really quickly. So the challenge in looking at this at a smaller scale is that the amount of logistics and operations and training, developing this, making them use it, being able to track the effective utility of it is really hard. And so if you are going to do this on a smaller scale, either you have an effective model that works and then you're able to replicate it, but there's a gap here, right? I'm seeing a similar trend that used to happen with village-level entrepreneur models. So everyone thought that everyone could become an entrepreneur and everyone should be going doorstep selling solutions to make it effective, make it an effective business. And we've learned through Hindustan Lever and we've learned through ITC and others that it doesn't work, that it's a really challenging model, and really not everyone should be an entrepreneur and not everyone has the ability to doorstep selling, and there's no sustainable scale in that. So similarly, in this product production drive that we're going into for smaller scale solutions, we're seeing that challenge again. We're making an assumption that because they have resources, they should be the ones creating that solution. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to collaborate and think outside of the box. So they have cattle, they have the resources. Can we collect that, create it, and then sell it? So we're trying to think through more effective, smaller scale solutions, but keeping in mind the level of capability, resources allocated to make someone capable, and then understanding that break-even model. So it could be an interesting exercise on a nonprofit side. I haven't seen it effective on a profitable side to really try to understand, to make it work. But I think the model could work, it could make sense, we just need to try it out.
Last question is that you are working in rural India. Do you have any interest in working in urban India in communities and slums and all?
Sure. So we are starting to now. So half of my microfinance experience was in urban slums, and the other half was in rural India. And I think there's a very interesting opportunity there, but we're starting to understand the different dynamics of what the needs are in urban slums versus rural, which are slightly different, and trying to understand how to kind of package that more effectively, working with partners on the ground.
So here you are seeking collaborations from US chapters and all.
Yeah.
Let me do it the other way. USGBC is thinking about trying to work in Vishakhapatnam, which was recently affected by Cyclone Hudhud.
Yep.
And so the point is that if at all you're interested, we can think about how to work together in Vijayawada in a small community in some of these principles that you have been working. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And I think that's a great way to actually end this, that we end it with a nice collaborative story. The answer is yes. We have presence in Andhra, and so it would be great to do some collaborations. I want to thank you all for coming early in the morning and hearing me speak. And I know that, there's a lot more discussion that can happen in this, and I'd be happy to share more information. I think my contact information is on this. Yes, it is. So please feel free to reach out. And as I said, I think there's plenty of opportunities for collaboration, plenty of opportunities to engage further, and thank you so much for having me here.